we'll start the hearing. So this hearing will come to order. The title of this hearing is 1 year after disaster, experts weigh in on the Palisades Fire. I want to thank all the witnesses for taking the time to appear and for taking the time to prepare your testimony. I just want to start out with an article that I'd asked to be entered into the record without objection, written by Congressman Tom McClintock of California. In this letter, he states that prior to 1800, on average, California had 4.5 million acres of land burn annually. 4.5 million acres. By the end of the 20th century, prior to the year 2000, by proper land management, they had reduced that to, on average, about 250,000 acres. So from 4.5 million to 250,000 because of good leadership, good governmental policies. Unfortunately, in 2020, California saw 4.3 million acres burn again, and between the years 2019 and 2023, it averaged 1.5 million acres. Didn't have to happen. It's a failure of leadership. A lot of people have asked, so why is PSI, Permanent Subcommittee Investigation, why are you investigating the Palisades Fire? Well, the story really starts with Senator Scott, who was a governor of a state and had to deal with a number of natural disasters, primarily hurricanes, was made aware of the after of the Palisades Fire, how things just weren't being built. And so he went, as part of a trip, I guess, to Australia. He came back into the States and into Los Angeles, and so he toured that, found out this is something that really needs to be investigated because, let's face it, the federal government's going to be called upon to probably provide funding for disaster relief. And I think it's very appropriate for this subcommittee to find out where prior dollars went, how was California, how have they used that? What haven't they done? Well, obviously, I think all the testimony here will be say this is something that never should have gotten out of control. These disasters should not have been as enormous as they actually were. So again, what I think this committee needs to do is we need to investigate what happened before, what happened during, what happened after. And I don't think we're going to cover all those topics in testimony today, but I think the before and after, before and during, I think we'll cover quite well. The other reason that Senator Scott asked to do this investigation under PSI is we have subpoena authority. And we will use it if we have to. Now, we've gotten, according to staff, 234,000 pages of documents. We appreciate. Some of them not particularly relevant. I mean, we're used to getting document dumps here. So we'll start targeting our requests, and this is just to put everybody on notice. We intend to investigate this thoroughly. We expect transparency, and if necessary, we will compel testimony and compel document production. But with that, this really is an investigation led by Senator Scott. He's the one, the expert of this, and his staff, so I'll turn it over to Senator Scott for a more formal opening remark.
Sure. First off, I want to thank each of you for being here and share your stories. I want to thank Senator Johnson, Chairman Johnson, for doing this because this committee, in his role in this committee, he does have a subpoena authority, so he can make sure we actually get to the bottom of this. The victims deserve to know what happened. All right. So the way this, as Chairman Johnson said, I came back from a trip last August and I went down to see the Palisades, and I was just shocked. I mean, there was just block after block, there was nothing. There was burnout homes, and there was nothing happening. There was absolutely nothing happening. So we have hurricanes in Florida. We have floods with some. We have tornadoes, and what we do there is we're one, keep everybody alive if we can. That's our first goal. Number two is as soon as the storm passes, we get going. How can we get things rebuilt? How can we get businesses reopened? We're after it. Like nothing. And that was 8 months after it happened. So it just shocked me. So I came back and talked to Chairman Johnson. And so we traveled down to the Pacific Palisades in November to hear from victims. We did a hearing out there, and we heard from victims directly. And they were just frustrated. No answers. So one thing we do in Florida as a hurricane, we do after action reports. And because I can just tell you, I had four big hurricanes. I learned on every one of them. I was better on my fourth than I was on my first, right? Because you learn what's important. And so the thing, California, this is not the first time this happened to California. Where is the learning experience with this? And what we do in Florida, which I'm sure the goal in California is everybody has responsibility. The homeowner, the individual has responsibility, local government, state government, and federal government. We all have responsibility. And so, but what you hear is there wasn't a lot of coordination. And what's worse is people died. It's one thing to lose your house, and that's horrible, right? But we lost people. And then you heard the stories of how the evacuation happened, and you can't imagine. I mean, we do evacuations. I got 6 million people to evacuate Hurricane Irma, but we did an orderly evacuation. I mean, our police departments, our fire departments, our sheriff departments, emergency management, everybody, we all work together to get it done. The federal government has spent billions of dollars in California for fire management and disaster mitigation. So was there any value out of that? I mean, that's the question we have to ask. So we've got to understand, what happened to the local fire department's budget. I can just tell you, I'm sure fire departments in California are just like firefighters in Florida. They bust their butt. They put their lives on. I've got a nephew that's a firefighter. They put their lives on the line every day. You don't know what's going to happen, and you're walking into dangerous situations. So everything you hear, the firefighters did everything they were asked to do and more. But it seems like there's a lot of politics involved. When the fire broke out, fire hydrants were dry. How in God's green earth could that happen? Right? It wasn't firefighters who did that. The reservoirs were empty. The mayor was missing in action. The deputy mayor for public safety was on administrative leave. So the firefighters that worked hard to extinguish a fire that later reignited and consumed the Palisades Fire had faced interference from environmental scientists on the state's payroll. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on firefighting, but where we get some wildfires in Florida is in the Everglades in a dry season. I mean, the firefighters stay there until everything. I mean, I was always shocked how long they stayed there to make sure, and they put so much water on this stuff. And so how could a fire be left smoldering? And I don't think it was the firefighter's decision. So everybody's tried to shift the blame, and that's what happens in politics. But our goal is for the benefit of the victims. Let's find out what happened, why it happened, and then let's make sure it never happens again. If there needs to be accountability, there ought to be accountability. But that's what the goal is. And I want to thank Chairman Johnson again for hosting this hearing. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get this done.
Thanks, Senator Scott. Next we'll turn to a ranking member for his opening statement.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. There's no question that the Palisades Fire was a horrific calamity. Communities were wiped out, thousands of homes were burned to the ground, and 13 people lost their lives. It was also far from the only natural disaster our country has faced in very recent years. In Texas last summer, more than 135 people died in a historic flood. Communities across the South are still struggling to recover from Hurricane Helene 2024. My home state of Connecticut, a severe rainstorm in August 2024 unleashed deadly flash flooding, causing millions of dollars in damages and killing 2 people. And we've seen just this weekend the storm that occurred, dumping snow and freezing rain across all of our states, I think represented here, except for maybe a few, Florida. And my concern is about the national response to these natural disasters, not just in California, but in all of those states, red and blue, where cuts in FEMA funding are crippling the resilience and robustness of the federal response in those areas. In April 2025, FEMA sought to cancel funding for building resilient infrastructure in communities, the BRIC program, which helps communities future-proof for natural disasters. More recently, FEMA slashed the reimbursements it provides to fire departments when they send vehicles to help fight fires outside their jurisdiction, the type of mutual aid operations that are essential to fighting fires. Responsibility for these cuts goes to Secretary Noem, who has weakened the Federal Emergency Management Agency, making it harder for Americans around the country to be prepared for and recover from these kinds of natural disasters. I just want to make clear, the effect is on red and blue states alike. Secretary Noem's insistence on personally approving every contract worth $100,000 has delayed critical aid to survivors, including the deployment of search and rescue teams in the Texas flooding. My home state of Connecticut is waiting on $5 million in hazardous mitigation funds and some $80 million in public assistance funds. This repayment for expenses FEMA has already approved are stuck in Secretary Noem's endless queue. Survivors of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina have received only $1 billion of the estimated $60 billion in damages the state experienced from the storm. And FEMA has been withholding millions of dollars in mitigation funding from Florida, Louisiana, and Texas. Now, FEMA's lost thousands of employees in the first half of 2025. Its resources have been decimated, and I believe that we should devote the same kind of scrutiny we are devoting to this fire and the recovery from it to FEMA and the crippling effects of cuts and cancellations of contracts and the review process that has been established by Secretary Noem. Finally, I just want to say I'm grateful to Spencer Hawkins for appearing here today to address how policy changes at FEMA over the past year have made the work of local emergency response offices, like the one he leads, even harder and more perilous. Thank you, Chairman Johnson.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. It is a tradition of this subcommittee to swear in witnesses, so if you'll all rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before the subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated. Our first witness is Fire Chief Patrick Butler. Chief Butler is the Fire Chief and Harbor Master for the city of Redondo Beach, California. He has over 36 years of experience in the fire service, including 32 years with the Los Angeles Fire Department, where he retired as an assistant fire chief. He holds a doctorate from the University of Southern California and a master's degree from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. Chief Butler.
Chair, ranking member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear for you today. My name is Patrick Butler. I spent 36 years in the fire service, including 32 years with the Los Angeles Fire Department, where I rose to the rank of assistant chief. I currently serve as the fire chief and harbor master for the city of Redondo Beach. I have lived in Los Angeles for more than 50 years and raised my family here. This is my home, and I have a direct stake in the safety of the region. I appear today in my personal and professional capacity to draw on my experience managing large-scale wildfires to address Los Angeles' failure to properly plan for and execute effective suppression and incident management during the Palisades Fire, and to explain how this disaster departed from long-established wildfire doctrine. My central finding is unequivocal. The Palisades Fire was preventable. Over my career, I've commanded and operated during some of the largest and most complex wildfires in Los Angeles and Southern California. I have served in command, operations, aviation, and interagency coordination roles during extreme wind-driven wildland-urban interface fires. This assessment is grounded in executive-level command experience across more than 50 wildfire incidents, including numerous large-scale pre-deployments supported by operational records and after-action reports. In the early hours of January 8, 2025, I responded under mutual aid to the Palisades Fire. What I observed was not simply a difficult fire under extreme conditions. It was a predictable outcome of a breakdown in leadership, preparedness, and command discipline. Firefighters were forced to improvise without adequate resources, unified command, or consistent safety oversight. This was not a failure of effort by firefighters. It was a failure of leadership above them. The fire that began on January 1st, known as the Lockman Fire, was never fully extinguished. It became a holdover fire, a well-known and predictable hazard in the chaparral environments such as the Pacific Palisades. In my experience, when holdover fires are not aggressively extinguished and are not continuously monitored, they rekindle. That is not rare. That is expected. When the forecasted life-threatening winds arrived on January 7th, the unmonitored Lockman Fire predictably reignited and spread rapidly. What followed was not unforeseeable. It was the expected result of leaving a holdover fire unmanaged in a densely populated, high-risk community with limited evacuation routes. Los Angeles possesses decades of wildfire experience, established pre-deployment doctrine, and area-specific operational plans for every major wildland-urban interface corridor, including the Pacific Palisades. These plans were written, trained, exercised, and repeatedly proven effective. I was directly involved in their development and personally executed them during prior wind-driven fires in these same communities. For more than a week before this fire, the National Weather Service issued repeated warnings of a life-threatening wind event. Fire weather intelligence clearly identified the Pacific Palisades and the still smoldering Lockman Fire within the projected impact area. This failure was not a lack of warning, it was a failure to act. In incidents I previously commanded, forecasts of this severity triggered immediate escalation, large-scale deployment, extended staffing, and full activation of emergency management systems. Forecasts were treated as operational decision points, not background information. That did not occur here. Once a fire becomes fully wind-driven, outcomes are largely determined by what leaders did or failed to do before the wind arrived. That decision window existed and it was missed. These failures extend beyond the fire department. During critical preparedness period, the mayor was out of the country despite knowledge of the forecasted life-threatening conditions. Responsibility for continuity of leadership in the citywide coordination rests with the mayor, and in this case, that responsibility was not met. After the fire, internal after-action findings were altered despite documented objections from the independent review team. I'll follow up in closing here. Based on my experience, the fire was not an inevitable disaster. It was a preventable event shaped by decisions made before the wind arrived. When leaders act early on known risks, disasters are prevented. When leaders delay, defer, or minimize risks, disasters are manufactured. The Palisades Fire was not caused by weather alone. It was caused by leadership decisions.
Thank you, Chief Butler. Our next witness is a former battalion chief, Rick Crawford. Chief Crawford has 34 years of experience with the Los Angeles Fire Department, including service as a battalion chief. He is a graduate of multiple advanced leadership and crisis management programs, including executive education at the University of Southern California, Cornell University, and Harvard University. Chief Crawford.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Rick Crawford. I'm a retired battalion chief from the Los Angeles Fire Department, where I served more than 3 decades in frontline and executive incident command roles. During my career, I served as an incident commander, deputy operations section chief on the LAFD incident management team, and public information on complex, high-profile Type 1 incidents. I commanded one of the busiest 911 communication centers in the world, where I directly handled pre-deployment and pre-positioning of resources. I've responded to some of California's most catastrophic wildfires, and my experience also spans active shooter incidents, infrastructure failures, natural disasters, and large-scale multi-agency crisis operations. Beyond operations, I served as a chief negotiator and author of the Los Angeles Fire Department's 23 automatic and mutual aid agreements, strengthening response capabilities across local, state, and federal partners. I'm a California Level 1 fire investigator and nationally certified fire and explosion investigator. I've also led the development and integration of the interagency response ordering capability to improve how resources are requested and deployed during major incidents in the city of Los Angeles. I currently serve on the board of directors for a national crisis management academy, and I advise leaders across the country on preparedness, response, and governance. Additionally, I serve as a national media commentator providing live on-air analysis during unfolding incidents. I appear before you today to discuss the Palisades Fire, not simply as a wildfire, but as a case study in how known risk, predictable conditions, and fragmented leadership and governance can converge into catastrophic impact. I can say this without hesitation, this fire was not unforeseeable. Southern California exists in a permanent state of wildfire risk with terrain, fuel loads, wind corridors, and seasonal weather patterns are well documented. What failed was not the tactics, strategy, courage, or professionalism of firefighters and first responders. What failed was not the willingness of agencies to act. What failed was the leadership and the system's ability to convert known risk into decisive, coordinated action early enough to change outcomes. From decades in command and coordination roles, I can state unequivocally, wildfires are not disasters at ignition. They become disasters when warnings are recognized but fail to trigger executive action, when leadership is fragmented, and when preparedness exists on paper rather than in execution. The Palisades Fire exposed 3 systematic vulnerabilities. First, risk recognition did not translate into risk ownership. While the threat was widely understood, fiscal considerations repeatedly overrode responsibility for mitigation, readiness, and timely escalation. Predictive fire modeling tools were available but went unused, and interagency coordination was not fully integrated into pre-incident decision-making, allowing known risk to persist without decisive action. Second, governance did not move at the speed of conditions. Wildfires escalate in minutes, and governance systems often move in hours or days. That gap between emerging threat and unified empowered decision-making can determine whether an incident remains manageable or becomes catastrophic. Third, our systems remain overwhelmingly reactive. We continue to rely on extraordinary effort by responders to overcome leadership governance gaps rather than designing systems that reduce the likelihood of catastrophe before deployment ever begins. This pattern is not unique to the Palisades Fire. It reflects a broader national challenge. In crisis management, I use a simple framework: recognize, respond, resolve. Recognition requires early action to warning signs and emerging threats. Respond with decisive and adaptable leadership. And resolve with the mission completion mindset, with accountability, institutional learning, and structural reform, not simply rebuilding what existed before. This is why I've advocated for what is known as the all-risk governance doctrine, designed to be integrated into a broader national framework. A 10-point plan, all-risk governance doctrine establishes clear authority, predefined escalation triggers, and unified executive accountability across all hazards before an incident occurs. It moves decision-making upstream, ensures warning signals trigger action, and aligns fire, law, technology, utilities, emergency management, and mutual aid under a single governance framework. My testimony is not about assigning blame after the fact. It is about asking the right questions and implementing aggressive, actionable solutions so the next fire does not follow the same script. Disasters like the Palisades are simply not environmental events. They are stress tests of leadership, governance, and institutional readiness. The American people do not expect perfection. However, they do expect foresight, they expect coordination, and they expect accountability that leads to safer communities. I appreciate the committee's attention to this matter, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Crawford. Our final witness is Mr. Spencer Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins is the director of Macon-Gibb County, Georgia, Emergency Management Agency. He has spent over 20 years as a professional emergency manager. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Public Administration and a master's degree in Criminal Justice from the University of Central Florida. Mr. Hawkins.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify today. My name is Spencer Hawkins. I'm the chair of the Government Affairs Committee with the International Association of Emergency Managers. an organization of more than 5,000 emergency management professionals who serve communities of every size across this nation. I am also a local emergency manager serving Macon-Bibb County, Georgia. Emergency management is built on a long-standing partnership that is locally managed, state-supported, and federally funded. This system has worked for decades through hurricanes, wildfires, and floods. However, local and state emergency managers are deeply concerned that the rapid shifts in federal policy and funding levels could destabilize the system. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, provides the backbone of our national preparedness, response, and recovery efforts. Areas such as training, financial grants, response, recovery, mitigation operations are key to our holistic national emergency management posture. For decades, local emergency managers have led disaster response. States provide support for locals, and FEMA provides funding and resources. Training ensures that stakeholders who are not emergency managers, including public works, law enforcement, health officials, and many more, can operate together under a unified system. Emergency management preparedness grants provide mission-essential funding to emergency management programs. Programs like the Emergency Management Performance Grant that are not handouts. They require a dollar-for-dollar, non-federal match, meaning local governments are true partners alongside the federal government. In times of crisis, FEMA's response elements are indispensable, from coordinating incident management assistance teams and urban search and rescue to supporting the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. FEMA ensures that states can help one another when local resources are overwhelmed. FEMA also manages the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, a mission that depends on a highly voluntary partnership with private providers, making FEMA's coordinating role essential to life safety. The recovery phase is where the federal role is most visible. During Hurricane Helene, local governments in the Southeast did everything they could, but no city or county can shoulder millions of dollars in damage alone. FEMA's assistance through the individual assistance and public assistance process was not just helpful, it was the only path to debris removal, temporary housing, and stabilizing local economies. However, as an example of the current unstable recovery environment, communities devastated by Hurricane Helene are still waiting on recovery funds from FEMA. Typically, these dollars would have already been in place to facilitate the rebuilding process. To break the cycle of disasters, we rely on mitigation and risk reduction funding. This includes everything from major infrastructure projects to small but critical efforts like vegetation management to reduce wildfire risk. Despite these successes and decades of experience working with FEMA, emergency managers across the nation feel the ground moving under their feet without enough warning. Uncertainty makes it harder to plan budgets, hire staff, and prepare residents for the next worst-day scenario. This is not an ideological or partisan issue. A shift in federal disaster support affects California residents as well as West Virginia residents equally. Disasters do not differentiate by state or political affiliation, and neither do we. IAEM urges Congress to safeguard the core capabilities of FEMA that FEMA provides to ensure any reforms to the federal role are developed in partnership with emergency managers, specifically local emergency managers, and professional organizations like IAEM, and that they are included in the collaborative process to shape the future of FEMA and emergency management funding, with phased timelines and meaningful considerations on the reforms. Communities cannot turn on a dime, but with clear communications and sustained partnerships, we can meet the challenges ahead. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Based on Mr. Hawkins' testimony, you'd kind of think that the federal government is the primary one responsible for preventing disasters and making sure that everything goes well afterwards. I think it has it completely backwards. I think the hierarchy is a local response first, supported by the state, and the federal government really comes in. It does provide funding after the fact. And one of the reasons we're holding these hearings is we're going to be asked to probably spent billions that never should have been required to be spent had the state and local officials done their job. You know, I started out with Tom McClintock's op-ed there where he talks about California prior to the 1800s, on average burning about 4.5 million acres, had reduced that 250,000 acres by the year 2000. Now it's back up there almost as high as it was prior to the 1800s. So again, I want to focus on the before and the during. Probably won't talk a whole lot about the after. That's probably for a different hearing. But, you know, both chiefs, I don't think even in your written testimony you really addressed the fact that the reservoirs weren't filled, that the brush and the combustibles weren't managed, weren't taken care of. So, we'll start with you, Chief Butler. Can you talk, what do you know about what happened with the reservoirs and why you didn't have, proper water resources?
Excellent question.
Make sure is your mic on?
Sorry about that. Excellent question. In my experience, being an incident commander, anytime there is a water infrastructure issue, the first and foremost thing I do is ensure that the systems that I'm going to be in charge of are operating, number one. That involves engaged with all the department agencies involved in the city. I've had incidents where water mains were going to be shut off. And my expectation was to city government as an incident commander is that if you're going to shut it off, you shall have 15 water trucks standing by. And then that shut off will not last more than 36 hours. So the infrastructure will amplify the issues. Weaknesses will amplify the issues.
But let's talk specifically. In Palisades, yes, there were two reservoirs. They were both empty, correct? And they were empty for how long?
The San Ynez Reservoir was empty, I believe, for about 11 months. And that
the one that they were repairing the cover?
The cover on it was being repaired, and it was one of the primary helicopter filling reservoirs that we use in the city.
And they had another reservoir that could have been available that also was empty.
I wasn't familiar. I think it's Chautauqua, but to your point, infrastructure like that should have water in it, pressure in it, and ready to go.
Chief Crawford, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you. The part of this is understanding that this was what I call as a trigger point. And this is as soon as we get that predictive, that particularly dangerous situation, we get a red flag alert, this should be requiring triggered conversations of all of the agencies combined. We've got fire, we have law, and the Department of Water and Power. If those conversations are the things that need to take place. So if you have a reservoir sitting open for 11 months, it gets discussed prior to the water before a fire starts to happen, before the wind blows. To Chief Butler's point, this allows for a backup potential for plan to be able to have water tenders and those particular things on standby. The bigger question I'd like to bring up here is why are those trigger points not being discussed at the top of the leadership of the LAFD and across the spectrum of all the other agencies? And that's really where this lies. So if you have a reservoir sitting open for 11 months, this cannot be missed anymore. And so the solution that I kind of see in this is—
So again, who missed it? Again,
it was missed on multiple fronts. It was missed by the Department of Water themselves by not being able to state that they have reservoirs empty. It was missed by the fire department by not asking the questions, are all systems online? It was missed by the Southern California Edison. All of the utility companies should be coming together, having this conversation on one large conference call.
So has anybody been held accountable?
To my knowledge,
names been named. It was your responsibility to make sure that reservoir was filled up. It was your responsibility to make sure that the Lockman fire was put out, and you didn't pull fire. I mean, who pulled the fire crews from the Lockman fire? It wasn't the crews themselves, right? They were ordered away from that fire, correct?
So to finish that portion of the question is, yes, they were pulled away from the fire. They were ordered to roll their hoses up.
And who pulled them away?
So there was a battalion chief in charge.
Who's that?
His name is Mario Garcia. Chief Garcia, the question I'd like to add or to bring up as a bigger point is for a battalion chief with his experience level to say to roll up the hose and leave, the bigger question is this is a leadership failure that goes all the way to the top, not just at Chief Garcia's feet. So there should be a question is that if I'm with Chief Butler and he's my superior, I am letting him know what my actions are. And
So do we know where the buck stops on that one?
we do not know. We do not know where the buck stops
So
totally,
why don't we know?
we have to ask those right questions exactly. Who is on duty and who is that superior officer of Chief Garcia, and then the superior officer of that goes above that. That's where the buck stops, because you need to have those people.
So has anybody been fired? Has anybody been held accountable? Has anybody resigned from this?
No.
Chief Butler?
To your point, I think that's one of my closing pieces, is that you can't have a disaster, the most costliest in history of the world of scale like this, and not anybody get fired. My expectation is when I take command, that I'll be relieved of command if something were to go wrong.
So after action reports were doctored, correct?
That's correct.
Do we know who doctored them? Do we know who directed the fact that they pulled out information that wasn't particularly flattering for political leaders?
The record shows that the department staff internally had created their own preferred narrative. And so I believe a committee like this can go forward and say, okay, we want to know who specifically was
So
involved.
the reasons I'm asking these questions is not necessarily that you have the answers. The reason I'm asking these questions is these are the questions we will be asking and that we will be demanding answers to. Because I think the people of California, the Palisades, and even I want to talk about the Eden fire next. I'm running out of time. They need to understand this, and because I think you both made very important points for testimony that if you don't have an honest after-action report, the failures will continue. And there will be more disasters and more lives lost, more property damage and stuff. So again, these are the kinds of questions this investigation has to get to the bottom of. We need to find out who made these disastrous decisions or lack of decisions. You know, who failed California by the lack of action or overt actions. With that, I'll turn it over to the Ranking Member Blumenthal.
Thanks, Senator Johnson. Mr. Hawkins, again, thank you for being here. I think in your testimony, you referred to emergency response as locally managed, state-supported, and federally funded. In essence, a three-legged stool. You didn't intend to minimize the importance of local involvement, did you?
No, Senator. As a local emergency manager, absolutely not. I've been doing this for 25 years, and we have a saying, disasters start and end locally. And so we've lived that paradigm that it is locally managed, locally led, supported by the states, and then federally funded.
And when federal funding is reduced, what's the impact on local capacity to foresee and prevent, as well as to recover from natural disasters like Palisades?
Local capacity for emergency management is already at an extremely low level. Argonne National Labs did a study that highlighted this. But when you start reducing funding for communities that are already at risk, especially our small and rural communities, that can be, those federal funds, those federal grants could be the lifeblood that enhances and operates their local emergency management offices. And so this shift in funding or the unknown of funding can be very detrimental to how we as local emergency managers protect our communities and keep our neighbors safe.
Just as one example, federal reimbursement for vehicles used in fighting wildfires is important, is it not, to local authorities?
Yes, any federal funding that locals can utilize to help enhance our emergency management operations are critical to what we do.
Mr. Chairman, I want to note that there have been delays, as I said in my opening statement, to local governments and authorities all across the country, including Florida, Louisiana, Connecticut, and yes, in California, despite numerous requests from California's congressional delegation, the administration has yet to transmit to Congress the state's request for $33 billion in a supplemental appropriation for wildlife recovery. I share your concern, Senator Johnson, about the victims of that wildfire. I invite you to join me in asking the Trump administration to release that additional federal aid. You can respond later or now. Thank you. Mr. Hawkins, would you say that your views on the importance of this federal funding are shared by your colleagues in the International Association of Emergency Managers?
Yes, it is. As the chair of the Government Affairs Committee, we meet once a month and we discuss legislation and what's going on the federal level. And like I said, we have representation across the country, small cities, small towns across the country, and federal funding can and is extremely important to what we do and helps take some of the burden off of our local governments. And so, yes, that sentiment is shared by our community members.
Let me ask Chief Butler and Mr. Crawford, would you agree that those federal funds, in particular FEMA funds, are important to preparing for and preventing the effects of natural disasters and then recovering from them? Chief?
For me, local disasters start at the local level. That's been my experience throughout my career, and then it moves up to the state from there. After we're in a mode where we can no longer manage something ourselves at the local level, then federal support comes in. I've personally been involved with putting forward declarations. You're not always guaranteed to get the funding. So when I run an incident, I don't make it with the assumption that I'm going to get reimbursed. But it definitely helps, and it definitely helps with some of the long-term work we do on the fire ground. But the disasters are local, and it starts at that level.
I appreciate that. It definitely helps.
Yeah, I agree with both points. To piggyback on Chief Butler's point, it does start at the local level. And in my experiences where we have a raging fire that's going on and there's a determination that has to be made within a certain period of time to make the request of the fire management assisted grant that has to go out. And so in my experience, I've been the one that's starting to facilitate that, knowing that may be the possibility that has to be worked out later. However, the thing of it is that this is bigger than just California. This is something that happens that's going on across the country. And that's why I mentioned the all-risk governance doctrine, is because this starts to put together the type of framework that handles things prior to the incident, during the incident, and then post-incident in a disaster recovery authority type of framework. And so I just think that we should, or feel that we should be looking at this from a broader perspective, using California as very much a case study, because we do have all different types of incidents that occur there that do not occur in different sections of the country. Again, they do start locally and they do end locally.
And that's exactly the point I'm making. It's much bigger than California. These delays have been disastrous. $33 billion for California, billions in Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Connecticut, all across the country. The cuts and cancellations. You at the local level have to plan. You can't be guaranteed of reimbursements, but they are critical for communities across the country. Let me ask you, Mr. Hawkins, in the time I have left, laying off cadre of on-call response recovery staff at FEMA. These drastic cuts, have you seen the effects?
Not personally in my community, but I do know that post-disaster, a lot of our communities who have local emergency managers and local emergency management offices who those staffing numbers are very small, rely on that on-call FEMA Corps staff to come in and support the local emergency managers in the immediate recovery and the immediate response and recovery operations.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
So before I turn it over to Senator Scott, let's make something clear. The reason California is requesting $33 billion of after-action support is because of the utter incompetence and failure of Los Angeles and California elected officials. Let's be clear about that. This is $33 billion that should not be needed. Ms. Hawkins, I want to quick ask you a question. Because again, it seems like it's all about federal funding. What percent of a normal city, let's say at Los Angeles' fire department budget, comes from local government or state government? What percent of the total fire department budget?
I don't have visibility on a specific government.
Would you have any
or-
idea what it is on the police department? I mean, the emergency responders, you know what percent is paid for by state and local funds versus the federal government?
That's going to vary community to community across the nation.
Senator Scott, let me ask you, because you're former governor. Isn't it true that most local fire departments and local police departments are funded by local resources and state resources?
Mostly local. It's not even
A
state.
huge percentage, right?
Yeah, it's almost all of it. You're not relying on the federal government. You can't, it's something completely outside your control.
The federal
If
government's-
I can just add a point,
No,
Mr.
not right now. The 39, we're almost $39 trillion in debt.
Right.
The federal government is bankrupt. Most of these funds are provided by local and state,
The local
as is the
taxes.
hierarchy of emergency management. It starts with local and state. FEMA does finance after these disasters occur. Some of them are unpreventable. Some, like the Palisades Fire, is entirely preventable. So now the American taxpayer is going to be, I'm supposed to join in a request for $33 billion because California leadership utterly failed, and they were running budget surpluses to huge budget deficits. I'm sorry, we have to start questioning this when we're $39 trillion in debt. With that, I'll turn it over to Senator Scott.
Thank you. Chief Butler, I understand that one of the major obstacles firefighters faced when responding to the Palisades Fire was simply getting there. The Palisades neighborhood's on the outskirts of LA and has a lot of winding, narrow roads. I got to drive on some of them. Traffic was gridlocked when panicked residents tried to flee, and there was no sort of, as what they explained to me, and you look at the video, there was no evacuation plan that anybody seemed to follow. Some questioned when I was out there, they said, well, if the fire department knew there was a fire risk in the area, why didn't they pre-deploy trucks with water, and especially knowing that the reservoirs were empty, why didn't they pre-deploy trucks and firefighters? So can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, and specifically, what I'd like to focus on is what they did before. And so pre-deployment, I used to tell folks, it's not a slogan. It's we get the resources in there quick and early. And because you have forecasted winds in advance. So what I would do in my commands is when I knew this was going to happen or I had the winds in advance, we would put resources into those communities. First, it's better protection, limits, to your point, the response time, and it also allows us to get a jump on any fire. But all of these plans are actually well-written and documented and trained. In every promotional exam I've taken in this department, you need to know the Palisades plan, the evacuation plans. So it wasn't that they didn't exist, it's that they were not executed upon. And once the fire got started, that became completely unmanageable because a wind-driven fire at that point, there's unrealistic that you'll stop it. But pre-deployment is the reason we do this. Weather forecasting is the reason we do this. And I've done it well over 30 times in my career, and it's not something that I invented. It's something that's institutionalized in the fire department.
So why didn't they pre-deploy?
That would be a leadership decision.
Okay, when
Yeah.
you say leadership, let's go through. Okay, so you have the chief of the LA Fire Department, right? Then who's right above the chief?
The chief, the mayor.
Okay, so the leadership is just one person.
Well, it's the hierarchy of the department has command staff, and each one of those individuals, including when I was part of it, has an absolute responsibility to ensure all those systems are in place. And for a 10-day weather event to be brought upon them with all that knowledge not to take action, I think it's important to find out exactly what happened, who didn't make the decision, and who put the public at risk.
So somebody at the fire department or the mayor's office made the decision.
Absolutely.
Now that would be in the after action report, right? They would say specifically what happened, right? They would put that out.
That should absolutely be in it. In fact, after action reports in California are governed by state law, that they have to have all this information in them.
So
And that would be in
have
there.
you read it? Did it have it in there?
I've read it. They had no reference to it. I did read it. I read some of the drafts. But I think by the department's own admission, it was watered down to protect reputations. In their own words, they were quoted as saying.
Right. So Chief Crawford, you've read the after action reports. Did they say exactly how the decisions were made and who made the decision?
I have read the after-action report, and it does not state those decisions, which
Does
is...
that surprise you?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. No, it does not. And the reason being is that, there's typically in after-action reviews and previous incidents or previous things that have been put out, there's always been a discussion of how much is shown for public and how much is for private. So I'm going to say that I'm not surprised that happened. One other point that I'd like to make to piggyback on Chief Butler when it comes to resources and pre-positioning, there's plenty of opportunities to get this right. And they even had technology tools. There's a wildfire threat intelligence and integration center in California that they have, and they have a predictive services tool that shows seasonal weather patterns. It shows where the heaviest winds are going to be, and none of those were used. None of that was also talked about in the after-action report. One other thing was a predictive fire modeling with a Wi-Fi, what we call Wi-Fi. This is an evacuation tool that the department came to use in 2017. I helped instrument it with UC San Diego, and it's the 95 to 98% accuracy. And that gives you a footprint of how many homes and what the population of the fire in its path using the nearest weather station. That data is used to create the footprint, and it's very, very accurate. That is an important tool to understand who's at risk and where the fire is going to be with impact times. That was not used, nor was that also in the after-action review. So the question is that how did you arrive at the decision not to staff properly and why you do not pre-deploy? That was not inside of the after-action review, and I think it's a glaring question.
And so would that be a decision by somebody in the mayor's office or somebody in the fire department?
So it would be at the fire department. So the way it goes is you have the fire chief, and then below the fire chief was known as the command staff, comprised of 9 deputy chief officers. And then there's a flow of what we call assistant chiefs. Total of chiefs on the LAFD is about 96 to 99 chief officers. Those 9 to 10 chief officers typically have a conference call, and they all get on with this, and there's other people who are on the call, but the decision typically is made to pre-deploy or not to pre-deploy. It's staff. Staffing is different than pre-deployment. Pre-deployment is location where you put resources. Staffing is how many people you will have on duty. Those are 2 critical decisions that needed to be determined during these calls. The actions did not arise to the level of the particularly dangerous situation, and that's the type of pre-incident decision-making that highlighted why we're at a $33 billion request.
So when we have, the way it worked in Florida, when we had a hurricane, we had, it's been 7 years now, but I think we had twice a day, we had every emergency manager in the state on with the state emergency management team. So did they do daily briefings for the fire department before the fire?
I could speak to that, Senator. In Redondo Beach, there was at least a half a dozen conference calls because our city was worried about a gale force wind in our harbor. So I personally sat on 3 or 4 of those calls. My staff did as well, because those calls started on December 27th. And I looked at those risks for my city to begin planning what it might do in our city. And so those conference calls exist. I submitted records, probably over 422 pages, more than folks are interested in. But I have all the conference call notes because this is part of what we do.
So in Florida, the way they do it is you'd have all the, like a city like Miami has a county emergency management team, and there's like 37 cities there. So they would all coordinate on their own, and then everybody would coordinate through the state. So do you do the same thing in LA County? So
what happens, and the calls I was on, we use a similar model where the city agencies each have their own risk, and then they have county emergency operations or county emergency managers. And then through that system, the National Weather Service feeds information, and so they're not feeding into 50 different agencies. And then we have routine calls, sometimes as many as 3 times a day, updates on weather and forecasting. That's exactly how the system works. And that's why on this event, starting 10 days out, these discussions were going on.
But nobody acted.
In the city of Los Angeles, from my observation, what I saw, what I witnessed, not at a meaningful level.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Senator Marino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for another good hearing. So, Mr. Crawford, just some very quick questions. Did the LA Fire Department fail to complete a thorough mop-up of the Lackham fire, which led to the rekindling of unextinguished roots and embers causing the Palisades fire?
Yeah, in my expert opinion, yes, that was one of the major factors is that when the Lockman fire occurred on early mornings of January 1st, and the fire was extinguished, and as they started to scale down, typically you have patrols.
Just my question was, they didn't do a full mop-up?
No, they did not.
And that's standard practice, right? To do that, you want to make sure that you do that. That's not new, that's best practices, right?
You should be doing it. There should be a full mop-up of the incident.
Right. And they did. The key point is they didn't do it.
That's correct.
Do you want to add anything, Mr.
Yeah, I
Crawford?
sure do. I've done several holdover fires. I've probably done 20 of them. And the operation is this, especially with forecasted winds. You have a fire in the dense vegetation in a hillside community, my expectation is nobody's going to go home for at least 5 days. Water on the ground, digging out the roots and all that.
So they failed to follow basic processes that are pretty standard across the industry. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Just quick yes or no?
Absolute failure.
Okay. All right, the next one is, did the state parks ignore signs of unextinguished smoke embers after the LA Fire Department left the Latcham fire site and failed to monitor it proactively?
Well, let's just look at this. The responsibility is not with the state parks. I understand it's their particular territory, but the responsibility for extinguishment lies with the Los Angeles Fire Department. It lies within the mountainous zone of Santa Monica Mountains. And so I've written the agreement between the state parks that who is responsible for monitoring that. So in my opinion, even if a state officer shows up and I'm a chief officer on scene, I'm fully responsible for that fire if it reignites.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to continue to maintain my people there and include my superiors all the way up as far as the top.
But
That's the case.
Sorry to interrupt, but to be clear, they did not do that.
That's correct.
And did the mayor approve overtime for the firefighters to pre-deploy to Palisades?
So that was actually one of the fiscal concerns is that I don't believe, in my opinion, what's happened is they never reached the mayor's office of the request. They used their own particular budget, line item for overtime. And so trying to save those fiscal savings, is one of the reasons why they didn't pre-deploy.
So the money that they saved on overtime cost how much billions of dollars that now they're coming here to the federal government to ask us to bail them out for their own incompetence. I guess I'd ask any of the three of you want to answer the question. Actually, even if he's willing, ask the former governor of Florida the same question. How much federal money is required to fight local incompetence?
What's
the dollar value?
Yeah.
Like if you have completely incompetent local leaders and state leaders, how much money does it take to overcome that incompetence?
Well, let me just add to the record how little it would have cost to actually hire the right amount of staffing. So the LAFD has 1,000 firefighters, approximately 1,000 firefighters across three different shifts. It's 1,000 each day that's on duty approximately. All it would have taken was 126 personnel to staff 42 additional engines to put those on the street. And I'm not saying that would have stopped the fire. No, it would have not.
What's the total there?
It would have.
Do the math for the three viewers.
I don't have the exact number, Senator, but it definitely would have been a lot less.
$2 million bucks?
It would have been a lot less.
A couple $1 million. So the taxpayers of Ohio are willing to pay 1/49th of the $2 million. That's what the offer is for the state of Ohio to help the state of California. Because I think the idea that the taxpayer of the United States is burdened with this idea to pay billions of dollars to cover a local incompetence is totally outrageous. Now, I'm not a big California guy, so where in California, Palisades is near LA, I know that. What part of LA is Ghana in?
What part of it, like you said?
It's Ghana. Where in LA is Ghana?
It doesn't exist there, sir.
It's not? Then why would the mayor of Los Angeles be in Ghana?
Well, that's a question for
I thought she was
Mayor Bass.
she must have been there prepared. Like I look at what my colleague here, Senator Scott, did when he was governor of Florida, what Governor DeSantis did, being on the ground every day, managing the troops, making certain that you were ready before the storm, during the storm, after the storm. You look at Florida, where they rebuilt basically the west coast of Florida in a period of time that seemed unbelievable, but he was there. The governor was probably having some sort of fancy dinner at whatever that restaurant that he eats at in California that he doesn't let other people go out to eat during COVID. The mayor of Los Angeles is in a different continent. And then they all come back and come here to the federal government and say, oh, we are complete idiots. Would you mind handing over $36 billion? And then I'm just a little disappointed in my colleague from Connecticut saying, well, the problem is that we didn't give them the money fast enough. Why would we reward that level of bad behavior? I don't even understand this conversation. Are any of you familiar with the lawsuits that are going on now? And the request from the citizens of California requesting the federal government take over this? Because the fire happened, which was avoidable, as my colleague from Wisconsin has clearly laid out. Then you now have insurance companies and citizens suing the state of California because of total incompetence in their rebuild. There's people who are willing to put the money in to rebuild their houses, get the community going again, and because of bureaucracy from the state and the local levels, just won't do it. I mean, this is totally outrageous. What's even more outrageous, and I'll end and give my time back on this, is what's so outrageous is that somebody who has such an incredible track record of being so bad at their job as governor of California, only in the world of politics can you say, hey, take my incompetence that was highlighted for the world to see in California and make me president of the United States. I mean, only in our U.S. political system would have somebody have the gall to actually do that. It's a total disgrace. And I can tell you, speaking for myself in Ohio, I don't think California deserves $1 of the taxpayer dollars from the people of Ohio to cover up their disgusting incompetence.
So I will point out California spent close to $14 billion on a high-speed rail system, which will probably never be completed. They spend billions on illegal immigrants, offering themselves as a sanctuary state, sanctuary city. Again, these are just the realities we need to face when we're asking Ohio or Florida or Wisconsin taxpayers to, again, pay for their grotesque incompetence and mismanagement and poor governance. So appreciate the points you made. As I toured the Palisades with Senator Scott and others, what struck me is, I mean, there were homes that were still standing. There were structures still standing. And I know part of that is just sort of the luck of the draw. But when you're watching things on TV, you just see these huge walls of fire. And you just kind of assume it's just massive wall of fire, just consuming everything in its wake. And in some areas that happens. But it was, as it was described to me, is what happens with these high winds. It'll take different types of vegetation off a palm tree and fling that in the air, and then that goes into the vents of homes, and that's what really starts this. So that if you actually have the reservoirs filled, if you had trucks pre-positioned, we were told the trucks were all down the beach. And yet, as you tour Pacific Palisades, kind of like right in the middle, there's this, I don't know, probably like 4-lane, very large boulevard. Had they had fire trucks pre-positioned and water available, so much of the destruction, the physical destruction, could have been prevented. And that's saying nothing of the fact that they would have actually extinguished the Lockman fire. So, I mean, am I describing that right in terms of, how these fires just keep perpetuating themselves? It's just not, in some cases it is a massive wall of fire, but it's just what's being, set in the winds and then going into vents, that type of thing?
So typically, let's talk about this. You're talking about fire behavior is what you're talking about. And so what happens is that depending on the wind of it, we have a fire prediction modeling system that will tell us what the fire behavior forecast will look like. And part of that is what you're called spotting. And that means where you're taking a piece of a house or a tree or bark and it can blow. Sometimes it can blow as far as two miles downwind spotting. And those are starting other additional fires. And eventually, things start to merge. And so when a wind-driven fire gets out of control, it's difficult to stop. So the concept is, and like in Los Angeles, is what we call the hit it hard, hit it fast concept. Cal Fire also has a thing called the 90-10 rule, which is 90% of the fires to 10 acres or less. That's the typical standard that you try to have. And so part of this is aggressive pre-positioning. Part of this is aggressive and offensive-minded conversations, with these conference calls. But also it should result in the decision-making that your posture should look common across all agencies. You should have a common operating picture. And part of that common operating picture is getting those reservoirs, understanding what's online and what's offline, so you have contingency plans to implement in event something is faulty.
So, one of the questions asked us is, why aren't you concentrating on the Eaton Canyon fire? And I mean, Palisades, 12 deaths, 7,000 buildings, about 23,000 acres. The Eaton Canyon was 19 deaths, 9,000 buildings, about 14,000 acres. As I've read reports, it sounds like that might have been started by electrical wires, which again, mitigation efforts, get those things underground. Again, they spend $14 billion in high-speed rail and they don't try and eliminate that threat of electrical fire. Why is there so much emphasis on Palisades versus Eaton? I'll start with you, Chief Butler.
My experience is just strictly focused on the Palisades incident, and that was kind of where my expertise came from. Frankly, I don't have any background on the Eaton fire. I didn't respond to it. And so I think it's important that all the fires get the attention. But for me personally, I really focused on what folks did or didn't do before the wind came.
But was it because you had the Lockman fire in the Palisades that could have been extinguished, might have prevented the whole thing, versus maybe electrical fire in Eaton Canyon? Mr. Chief Crawford, can you answer that?
So
it just puzzles me.
So it's truly understand it is there's a domino effect that took place here. So the lack of staffing properly led to a large resource request onto the Palisades fire, which had a cascading effect to the agencies next to Los Angeles County Fire and other agencies, and they sent resources to assist the Palisades. So now you have other areas of the county that's resource light. And so when the Eaton Canyon fire happened later that evening, you had a ton of resources over at the Palisades. Proper staffing and pre-positioning eliminates having the need to request mutual aid, as quick as they did in the Palisades. So the response times to the Eaton Canyon fire, if you look at even all of the TV reports and the video footage, it took a very long time for them to get resources just on scene of that fire to begin with, which allowed that fire to expand.
Is it fair to say the failure, which led to the Palisades fire growing out of control, then contributed to the Eaton Canyon fire growing out of control? So this, again, the same people responsible for Palisades, there's a relationship there as well.
Although the two fires are very, far apart by mileage, but they're very interconnected with the amount of resources that was put on the Palisades from outside of the LAFD. And then in the resource request that you take that went even further than Los Angeles, it takes a long time to get those resources on the road and, and moving down towards Los Angeles, which goes back to the pre-incident conversations that when you have to circle back to. That's really where the crux of all this really lies, is those pre-incident conversations and the decisions that were not made, that did not reach the level and the speed of conditions.
But kind of getting back to my initial question here in pre-position, if you hadn't contained it a lot earlier, if you would have had the reservoirs filled, if you would have had fire trucks not on the beach but up there, could have you prevented some of the loss of life? Still would have been a pretty big disaster, but could have that helped mitigate the extent of the damage, Chief Butler?
The reason we pre-deploy is for that precisely, because forget about having a Lockman fire there. It's the weather events there, the winds come in fire weather. I've seen it before. We flood the areas, and when I've had fires, the job is to see if we can contain it and keep it in an area at least we can manage it. We're not going to put out a wind-driven fire. To the point of the Eaton fire, I do believe, because the county fire chief put a lot of resources in pre-deployment in his own department. In fact, he pre-deployed resources to Catalina Island because of the threat. But when Los Angeles didn't pre-deploy and needed resources, the city, not me, the city had to draw off what the county had already done to prepare for themselves. And so there was a cascading effect of one agency not pre-deploying and 5 other agencies having to fill in the gap.
Okay. Well, thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think this emphasis on prevention is really important because, as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Do you agree, Chief Butler?
Yeah. Prevention, 100%. I used to say that experts talk prevention and
FEMA funding plays a part in helping local authorities do more prevention, correct?
preventative. to that point, preventative efforts start locally, but if there's federal funding for big programs for...
You wouldn't turn it away?
Oh, I would not, sir. Not
By
a
no
bit.
means. Well, you know, I just want to say here, I think there's some common ground, which is local authorities have clear responsibilities. They're part of that three-legged stool that Mr. Hawkins described from his 25 years of experience in emergency response and preparedness. But FEMA also helps homeowners, small businesses recover. States like Florida, where they are still awaiting funding. Those are individuals. They are personal stories of disaster, destroying dreams, as well as physical structures, depriving people of homes that they're still struggling to rebuild. Wisconsin suffered floods in August of last year, really disastrous floods, and the president provided $29.8 million in September for recovery. Bravo. My point is that FEMA, namely the current administrator, is delaying the funding that communities are due to recover those individuals who've been struck with disaster, but also to make them more resilient. So in the future, they can better prevent those disasters. That's what the Federal Emergency Management Administration agency is supposed to do, not make it harder for Americans to prevent and recover from disasters. This idea that the secretary has to approve every contract worth $100,000 has delayed critical aid to those survivors. There's no reason for it. There's no precedent. And I would simply urge my colleagues to join me in demanding that FEMA do better. In December, FEMA started terminating additional staff with draft plans showing that up to 85% of its staff, 85% of its staff would be let go. They rescinded it because they were warned about Winter Storm Fern. Not clear how long that pause will last. We're dealing with an emergency in the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And I think it will affect communities like Mr. Hawkins and Chief Butler. Mr. Crawford, you've retired, but I think you're sympathetic to the needs of these communities. It is bigger than California. Absolutely right, Mr. Crawford. It is bigger than California. It is national in scope. And my colleague states may not have suffered it personally the way Connecticut, Wisconsin, Florida have, but I think we've all seen FEMA at work, helping local businesses, small businesses, who show up the next morning and they find that the flood or hurricane or tornado has ripped apart decades of hard work, destroyed their homes, roofs are gone, and FEMA appears there. At least it did, but not now. So I think this hearing, I hope, will enable us to realize what's at stake here, and it's not red or blue. Tornadoes, hurricanes don't really know the difference between red and blue states. And so I hope we have a bipartisan approach to this issue. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I will just remind the ranking member that FEMA funding is included in the DHS appropriation bill, which right now there are threats of shutting down government because they don't want to fund DHS. So we'll see what happens in the next few days in terms of funding DHS and FEMA. Senator Scott.
Chief Butler, I know you're aware the LA Fire Department has been a political lightning rod over the past, few decades. It seems like it's always in the news over some hot button issue like race, gender, or vaccine mandates. Can you talk about the the politicization of the department by city leaders, and has it caused any problems?
For me, everything's about operations. And the operations of the department, it's about doing your job, accountability, and all the pieces that make us good at our craft. And so external forces on the department, whether it be the political influence or whatnot, they do have an impact. Personally, for me, what I've always focused on myself is the value that you need to know your job first above all else, and that being good at your job is really what defines our success. In terms of the outside political discussions of the department, racism, discrimination, all those aspects, the department has had a long history of discrimination since the 50s. But what I've seen personally, too, is that it's a department that's pretty diverse and works hard together. For me, the piece of the department most important to me as a command officer is that we get the support to make sure the people that are in the right places are qualified and competent to do the job, and that their qualifications are rigorously scrutinized. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters most. And that's my position on it.
Chief Crawford, early draft of the fire department's after-action report for the Palisades Fire contained a frank discussion about the failure to pre-deploy assets and keep firefighters on duty. The final version, however, simply stated that preparations, quote, went above and beyond the standard LA Fire Department pre-deployment matrix, unquote. Do you agree with the early draft or the final version?
Neither. I agree with neither draft. The draft that was put forth that talked about the pre-deployment issues really just doesn't cut it. I do national media commentary, as I said before. In my first interview on the 8th of January, I said specifically that was the first misstep, was not withholding the off-going platoon and sending those folks home. That just it's hard to get people back once you send them home and then have them return back. Secondly, another point to that is using what we call the limited recall is it allows you to tell the third shift, be prepared to also be able to come in if we get something that's going to expand it beyond our normal scope. So when they decided to pre-deploy and say that in the final after-action review said it went above the matrix, it never showed what the matrix levels are to determine where that stopped. And so if you look at this from a perspective of this was supposed to be a historical, particularly dangerous situation wind event, and I would pretty much survey most of the department and ask them, have they ever heard of what we call a PDS? Probably most have not. Therefore, this cannot be what I said, business as usual. And that's how the department performed that day. And so you need to be going above and beyond even what you always ask the question, are we doing enough? And then what's our next level of planning? So it just doesn't cut it to say that we went above and beyond the pre-deployment matrix. It should have been something that was off the charts and in conjunction and looks like what the other departments were around you were also doing and matched their level of pre-deployment.
Thank you. Yes.
If I could add to that, in the report I provided, I have some bar charts, but basically the department deployed less than half of what was normal and customary. And I just
might want to explain what happened. I mean, you went back and looked at history and then look at what they allocated for the Palisades Fire, and it was different.
It was absolutely different. It was absolutely at a scale that I have never seen in my career. And the notion to go above and beyond, I think for the community, it's a completely different narrative to see what they lost and then to hear someone that went above and beyond. But I think there was clear departure. There was absolutely clear departure from what deployments had been in the past. And I only picked some of the ones I did. But overall, it was a big departure. And not only that, but I used weather prediction on the prior events that I looked at, and none of them were close to the level of threat of the Palisades. And so I believe that, The report I have here will provide some context to that. It has documentation. But back to my central point is that this was decisions made before the wind arrived, decisions that were the downstream effects of not putting money into infrastructure and resiliency, budget issues. But when the disaster hit, funding at that point is not the issue. When the disaster hits, you fund it. You know, they'll make me whole, you know, a few months later in front of the council. And it's exactly what we're supposed to do. But I believe also to talk about Chief Crawford, I kind of joke that sometimes your first draft is always the best draft, because by the time you get to your final draft, you've pretty much stripped it of stuff that you should have left in it to begin with. And so I did read the draft. I did speak to the individual who wrote the report. And the individual who wrote the report has publicly come out and stated that it was highly unprofessional for the department to have done that to the after-action report. And I think the records show that it's not even speculation on my part. This is exactly what happened.
And neither of you are questioning the hard work of the firefighters. What you're questioning is the leadership that they were given and the resources they were given. But the firefighters on their own, they showed up when they were doing what they were asked to do.
The firefighters on the front line do like they always do. It doesn't matter what you give them. If you give them a buggy, car, whatever, they're going to make it happen. I know that's how it is. That's how it was when I was a young firefighter. I still consider myself one today. Firefighters, they had all the heroism on the front lines. They even lost their own homes. They exposed themselves to a lot of hazards and toxins that'll be long-term effects. I'm a cancer survivor, and the recent passage of Congress and the President of the United States, the HEROES Act, is going to be something that's going to benefit folks like me and families of firefighters out there. So the heroics of the firefighters, it's unbelievable the stuff they do.
Thank you.
Senator Marino.
Mr. Chairman, I know the expression, we shouldn't let facts get in the way of a good story, but we should deal with facts here, especially a committee as important as this. And I just want to clarify for the record that the Secretary of DHS approves contracts over $5 million. I think the ranking member said it was $100,000. So I would ask that the record be corrected unless the ranking member has proof that that's inaccurate.
Without objection.
And then also, by the way, to note for the record that Congress itself, through the appropriations subcommittees, have to approve any awards above $1 million. So this notion that somehow Secretary Noem has micromanaged FEMA to choke it off is just totally and patently false. And I just don't think we should be trafficking in misinformation. To the three of you, if you guys, I'm going to give you a chance to give you a follow-up answer, but just a very quick yes or no. Given the discussion that we just had today, I'll start with you, Mr. Butler. Should Congress cease all funding of FEMA, yes or no?
My answer is no.
Definitely no, or maybe no?
No, I mean,
You should.
it's a definite, we need to continue to fund FEMA.
So it'd be a bad idea to defund it.
It would be a bad idea to defund FEMA, that's
Okay.
correct.
And Mr. Crawford, your opinion? Do you think that Congress should defund, meaning provide no more funds to FEMA?
No.
Okay.
I
And
do
Mr.
not.
Hawkins?
No.
And I think the ranking member, I'd give him a chance to say, but he could do an infomercial on the importance of FEMA based just on his testimony today. So next question, and I think our chairman brought this up, but I'm sure you're aware that 35% of the budget in the Department of Homeland Security's budget is FEMA. So 35% of what we're going to vote to appropriate of the DHS budget is FEMA. What would be the effects, Mr. Butler, of actually ending all funding to FEMA as of midnight on Saturday? Meaning that we're in the middle of a tough winter situation. We got a cyclone heading to New York and Boston. Who knows what other disasters are in play around the country. And of course, California is always proud to be incompetently step into a crisis. What would be the implications of no more FEMA funding as of Saturday at midnight from your perspective on the ground?
I think it would have a long-term impact on fire operations. But also, I think it's what I see funding for FEMA that affects local agencies like us is the Homeland Security grants that provide us all the advanced equipment, training, and whatnot. But stopping FEMA funding will definitely impact the fire operations.
Would it be hyperbolic, Mr. Crawford, to say that ending FEMA funding could cost the lives of American citizens en masse?
Well, when the storm hits, your local people are going to be responding. And so, FEMA obviously is not there at the time of the incident actually occurs. It's the aftermath that when it happens. And so the cascading effect you will see that will come down later.
But lives could be lost.
Well,
if you don't have shelter,
any of that's a potential. Yes, if it has to do with sheltering, it has to do with, with the long-term effects of housing. And so, yeah, that's going to cause problems and issues. But I do believe that because it's the local people that starts first, you don't see it immediately. It's the cascading effect. So when the cameras are gone away and everyone's gone home, when the smoke is cleared, that's when you start to see the effects of lack of FEMA funding.
and Mr. Hawkins, your view, what would be the implications of not funding FEMA as of Saturday at midnight?
It would have an impact on local emergency managers, local fire.
Add some adjectives. Right? It would be a slight impact, catastrophic impact, horrible impact, negligible impact.
It really depends on the community you're talking about. Different communities.
But not having FEMA would have a depends impact. So if FEMA just no longer had any money, it's shut down completely. You're saying it depends? So if you have a huge snowstorm that could be catastrophic to the coast in Massachusetts or Connecticut, it might impact people?
No, if there was a major disaster, yes, obviously, if there was no FEMA funding, that would be in fact impactful to that community. But on a steady state operation, much like the other two chiefs had said, yes, there would be an impact to communities across our nation.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think it's just really important to emphasize that what we're talking about today, it's Wednesday, January 28th, that the Democrats right now are going to make a decision whether to shut down the federal government, which would end the funding for FEMA, because they're mad about ICE operations that are fully funded for the next 4 years. So talk about cutting your nose off to spite your face. It's cutting your nose, your ears, and everything else. And they're going to put American lives at risk. Senator Scott, when you were governor, did you know when a hurricane was going to hit? Did it set an appointment on your calendar? You just don't know. Saturday midnight could come and go. We could be sitting here next week and have a major catastrophe in this country. And the Democrats are playing with the lives of millions of Americans by even talking about the idea of not approving a DHS funding bill, of which a third of it goes to FEMA, and none of it which will affect the funding of ICE. And I think it's just extraordinarily important. You made the point, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just highlighting it, how grotesquely irresponsible that is, especially disingenuous, coming from the ranking member who's doing an infomercial on the importance of FEMA. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Senator Marino. Senator Scott has a final question.
So, Chief Butler and Chief Crawford, so can you just list the 3 biggest blunders in leadership during the Palisades fire? Chief Butler, if you want to start, what would your top 3 be?
I'd say, one, failure of imagination would probably be the top to say. Being aware of the weather and the surroundings, situational awareness. Number 2, failure to take initiative on the weather that is coming your way. And lastly, I think, absolutely failure of leadership to understand the gravity of this and essentially not do anything meaningful to address it. I say in a sometimes joking but sad ways, had they extinguished the January 1st fire, there wouldn't have been a January 7th fire.
Yeah. Chief Crawford.
I'd like to add thank you, Chief, on those 3 points. To add to those, one, I was talking about the tone at the top, which is leadership. The mayor doesn't extinguish fires, but the presence of leadership is not negotiable. And so what the aspect of not having the mayor present, what that does is that leads to not having the person in charge of the city out in front of the press conference that needed to be happening on January 5th. that says, hey, this is what you need to have in your go bag. This is how you evacuate. This is the alerting tools you need to sign up for. This is what we're doing with resources. And so being out front, the citizens get behind that message. And so you have to have that continuity of executive leadership.
And there's only a couple people that can do that.
That's right.
The mayor could do it or the governor could do it. That's it.
Correct. Number two is I believe that what happens is, to Chief Butler's point, is a failure to imagine. I've been up in fires up and down the state of California, with Napa and Paradise and all of those things. And once you see that you can burn down a town, you understand the magnitude of 80-mile-an-hour winds and what it can do. And so understanding those, not acting on those threats, again, I say recognize, respond, resolve, not recognizing and having the appropriate action. And then lastly, not having a mission completion culture. After-action reviews need to not have lessons learned, but also lessons institutionalized. And the only way you do that is you start to have actionable items that have executive ownership to someone with benchmarks and trigger points and timelines that lead to accountability. If you don't have those three, that the beginning of leadership at the beginning, the failure to imagine in the middle, and then the after-action review, mission completion at the end, then you will repeat the mistakes of the history. History will repeat itself, excuse me.
Well, thank you. I want to thank all three of you for coming and testifying. I mean, the victims of the Palisades deserve answers. There needs to be accountability, and we need to stop wasting our money at the federal level. We have, like the chairman said, we have almost $39 trillion worth of debt. We just can't keep writing checks for incompetence.
Mr. Hawkins, the other two witnesses had an opportunity to provide kind of closing comments. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I'd just like to say this is a really important issue for our local communities, for our local emergency managers, our local firefighters, local law enforcement, who are in our communities every day trying to do our best to keep our communities safe and protect our neighbors. And the work that we do across the board, from the local level to the state level to the federal level, is critically important. And whether that funding comes from your local community that is providing your emergency management staff and information, whether there are state grants or federal grants that support what you're doing, I don't want us to forget how important it is to support our local communities and our local emergency managers. Like we've said, disasters start and end locally, and that's really important. And it takes a whole spectrum of response, and that includes federal funding, state partnership, and local leadership.
Again, I want to thank all the witnesses. You can't cure incompetence with money unless you remove the incompetence, unless you expose it and make sure those individuals who aren't qualified, who are incompetent, are no longer serving those roles. And I think that's the main part of this investigation, is to expose what happened, name names, identify the incompetence so it doesn't happen again. Again, I think the testimony said this shouldn't be a blame game. It has to be a blame game. You can't avoid that. If you doctor after action reports, you're never going to get to the truth. You'll never solve it for the next time. You won't prevent this in the future. So no, this is absolutely, people have to be held accountable. People lost their lives. The property damage is profound. So this is a serious investigation. Again, it's not one I would have undertaken. I appreciate the fact that Senator Scott was awakened to the need here, because it's not being undertaken by California and Los Angeles officials. It's simply not. It's a whitewash. So we intend to get the answers. We need to find out who's accountable. This will probably be transcribed interviews. We need documents. We need to get to the bottom of this so we can prevent this disaster, this preventable disaster, from happening again. But with that, the hearing record will remain open for 15 days until Thursday, February 12th, 2026, for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.